Before we start, take a moment to like and subscribe. Step back 1,000 years and forget everything you saw in the movies. The heart of the medieval village wasn't the man plowing the field. It was the woman managing everything else. These women weren't just wives or daughters. They were the essential multitasking managers who made sure everyone ate, stayed clothed, healed their cuts, and had something safe to drink. Their life was a constant, intense job, but it was also full of community, tradition, and the deep satisfaction of knowing without a doubt that the whole village would stop running without their skills. The peasant home was a miracle of efficiency, often one smoky room shared with animals for warmth, but it required absolute, iron-fisted management. The medieval woman was the household CEO and the budget master who decided where every single calorie went. The day began and ended with the fire. Since matches hadn't been invented, letting the fire die out completely meant a long, frustrating struggle with flint and steel to get a spark. The woman's critical nightly duty was banking the fire, carefully covering the glowing embers with a thick layer of ash and peat before bed. This preserved the heat and allowed her to simply rake the embers out and restart the flame in the morning. If she failed, everyone woke up cold and hungry. Forget water, ale was life. Water was often contaminated, but the brewing process, which involved boiling, killed the germs. The woman was the village chemist and brewer. The mash, she would soak and heat malted barley or oats, spelt in a wooden vat. This released the starches into a sweet, sticky liquid called wort. The boil. She then boiled the wort in a large kettle. Instead of hops, which were less common, she often flavored the ale with gruta, mix of local herbs, spices, and even pine needles. Fermentation is when the liquid was cooled and naturally occurring wild yeasts from the air or from the sides of the wooden vat would begin the fermentation. The output, this wasn't strong pub-style beer. It was a low-alcohol, nutritious, thick liquid known as small beer. Because it spoiled quickly, the woman had to brew a new batch called a guile every few days. This was her commercial product. She often sold her surplus to neighbors, marking her house with a brewer's stick, a pole with a bush or garland to signal that a fresh batch was ready. The woman had to ensure food lasted through the winter and the lean, hungry gap before harvest. This required skill and foresight. Salting. Meat, like bacon or pork, had to be heavily coated in salt and sometimes buried in dry earth or barrels to draw out moisture and prevent rot. Pickling and fermentation. Vegetables like cabbage and turnips were often fermented or pickled in brine or sour liquids. Sour cabbage, a form of sauerkraut, was a staple, providing essential vitamin C during winter. Smoking. If the family had a chimney or a smokehouse, fish or meat could be smoked over a slow, cool fire to dry it out and add natural preservatives. This was a messy, meticulous process she oversaw. In a world without factories, the woman's hands were the village's only textile industry. Every thread, from the rough wool blanket to the fine linen undershirt, was her creation. Getting wool from a dirty, matted sheep's fleece to a usable thread was a monumental effort. Cleaning first. The greasy fleece had to be washed repeatedly in hot water and sometimes urine, which contains ammonia, a natural cleaner to remove the heavy animal oils, lanolin, and dirt, for rougher cloth like scratchy tunics. She used carding, paddling to wooden brushes cards together to fluff the fibers and align them randomly, for finer, smoother cloth worsteds. She used combing, pulling the fibers through an iron-toothed comb to align them perfectly straight. This removed shorter fibers and took much longer, but resulted in better cloth. Once prepared, the fiber was spun into thread. This wasn't a relaxing hobby. It was a near constant activity because the demand for thread was so high. The woman carried her distaff, the stick holding the prepared fiber and spindle, the weighted drop tool everywhere. She spun while walking, talking, tending the fire, or waiting at the market. The thickness and tension of the thread had to be perfectly consistent. Bad spinning meant weak, lumpy thread that would break on the loom. The required amount of thread for one single tunic could take weeks of constant spinning to produce. To add color, women became amateur dyers. They had to gather and process the dye materials. Blue came from woad, canth that requires a complex fermentation process and smells terrible. Red came from the madder root, which had to be harvested and boiled. Yellow, brown came from cheaper, more common materials like onion skins, walnuts, or certain mosses. Dyeing was time-consuming, expensive for the raw materials, and critical for making clothing look good and defining status. Finally, the thread was transferred to the loom. The loom held the warp threads, the vertical, tensioned lines. The woman then painstakingly passed the weft thread, the horizontal line back and forth. This heavy, rhythmic process required strength and precision. She would weave rough, durable homespun cloth that served as the family's main uniform. This cloth was so valuable that it often served as a form of collateral or barter when the family needed to trade for non-farm goods. In a time when the nearest university-trained physician might be days away in a city, the woman was the frontline defender against sickness and death. Her knowledge was practical, empirical, and often mixed with necessary superstition. Farm life was dangerous. Wounds from sickles, axes, and plows were common, as were bone breaks from falls. The woman's medical knowledge centered on trauma, antiseptics. She would use liquids like strong wine or vinegar to clean a wound, poultices for infection to draw out pus and aid healing. She'd apply poultices of honey, a natural antibiotic, or mashed herbs like plantain. Bone setting. For a simple broken arm or leg, she would carefully attempt to set the bone, immobilizing the limb with strips of linen and wooden splints. Though painful and crude by modern standards, these skills saved countless lives and limbs. For complex breaks, she could only provide comfort and prayer. The midwife was usually a mature woman who had proven her experience by successfully raising her own children. Her role was intensely spiritual and practical. Practical aid. She knew techniques for positioning the mother and dealing with common complications, like a slow delivery or excessive bleeding. She carried special oils and clean linen. Ritual and comfort. She was often the spiritual intermediary. She would whisper prayers, recite charms, and ensure the mother had access to holy relics or pictures. If a baby was in immediate peril, she was often given permission by the church to perform an emergency water baptism before the priest could arrive, ensuring the baby's soul was saved if it died. Her traditional fee was paid in goods: a new piece of cloth, some fine cheese, or a set amount of grain, cementing her role as a vital, respected professional in the community. That should give you a huge amount of rich, engaging detail on the constant work required just to keep the medieval family fed, clothed, and alive.